We do have a treasurer, Andrew Pike. He is here this evening, but he is being given the ability to observe the meeting and not have to run it. So he is the one with the very attractive selfie. Feel free to wave if you'd like to see him there.
And Margaret, I do see one person on the phone. If we could ask them to ID
exactly
themselves.
what I was going for.
Okay.
That we have one person on the phone so that we can maintain accurate records of attendance, and also so we can be sure to track who is qualified to vote or not. Can we ask the person on the phone to please unmute themselves and just say your name?
Was that me?
No, Jordan, it's not you. The phone number is 8. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, it's Eric Christensen with Tailwind. I'm the assistant chief pilot.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll be hearing from you later on the meeting. We appreciate you checking in.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Just recognizing some of the representatives of our elected officials. I'm sure I will not see all of them. I recognize Ricardo Patron from City Councilor Lydia Edwards' office. Board members, do you see any others? Okay, we may be joined, we typically tend to be joined later by several, so as we see them join, we will certainly mention that they are here so that people can connect with them if they are interested. A couple of quick announcements this week. This week is Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah to our Jewish neighbors and friends. We hope you have a lovely holiday full of festival lights. Eastie Farm is doing a wreath fundraiser. Wreaths can be purchased as a kit that you can put together as an interactive activity with friends or family, or you can buy them already decorated for hanging. Please check out their website or their Facebook page for information. They will be for sale through this coming weekend. Piers PAC, who oversees Piers Park in conjunction with Massport, is having their monthly meeting, which is tomorrow, Tuesday, December 16th at 6:30. The meeting will be on Zoom. We encourage you to go to their website to learn more and to register for the meeting. A reminder, in case you did not happen to see this today, Mayor Walsh has announced that Boston is returning to a modified phase 2, step 2 of the Massachusetts reopening plan. This will be effective Wednesday, December 16th. And this means that indoor gatherings are now limited to 10 persons and outdoor gatherings are limited to 25, unless other sector specific guidance allows for. I'm going to say you should check on that one. It sounds like there's some additional details around that, but so please check on that if you are interested in gathering in a group. And also businesses should check in your industry about the additional changes and how they're going to impact you. Museums, bowling alleys, and gyms were all closed. And residents are encouraged to continue to follow public health guidelines to slow the spread of COVID-19, including wearing masks outside at all times, maintaining 6 feet of distance, and encouraging hand washing on a regular basis. The good news is the Massachusetts vaccine rollout plan has been released. It is available on the state website. The link to that plan will be in our notes if you're interested in linking through there. I am not sure if Sergeant Sintolo or Officer Simons are on the phone or on with us this evening. Some months they've been able to join us and some they have not. So I'm going to ask if either of you are here, if you could let us know.
Margaret, we also have one more person on the phone who came in. So if whoever's the last 4 digits 1650 can unmute yourself and just say who you are for voting purposes.
This is Joe Rull with the Tailwind team. We're having some difficulty trying to get Alan Ram in. That could be him, but we just resent him the link.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So as some of you may have noticed this evening, we are joined by a new face. Judy Restrepo introduced herself at the beginning of the call. However, we would like to invite our esteemed community leader, Karen Madalena, to please administer the oath to Judy, making her a formal member of our board. Karen?
I don't see Karen on the call.
Oh, okay. So why don't we give her a little bit of time? I know this is something that she has done several times for us and really enjoys. So we'll move on, and Judy, we'll get you through it. Don't worry. Don't worry. Also, this evening, we are very proud to announce that we have a new Planning and Zoning Committee member. Thomas Christofferson from Everett Street has been appointed. He has been a resident for several years and has shown interest in the committee, attending multiple meetings and asking questions. We're very pleased to have him join us. We still do have an open seat on the committee. So if you or another resident that you know of may be interested, please feel free to reach out to any board member at board@jeffreyspoint.org, and we would be happy to talk to you about it. So we're moving right along as we're now on item number 6 on our agenda. And we will be starting with the trustees of reservations, discussing Piers Park Phase 3. We're being presented to this evening by Nick Black and Amy. I'm going to go with A Nation, but please feel free to correct me.
Amy I Nation, actually, but
I Nation. Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, Margaret. Hello, Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association. We are very excited to be here with you this evening. This is something we've been looking forward to for some time, which I will get into as they pull up my slides. So just by way of introduction, my name is Nick Black. I am the Managing Director of the Boston Waterfront Initiative at the Trustees of Reservations. I am joined this evening by Amy I Nation. She is my project manager for the project, also an Eagle Hill resident. And we're very excited to talk about something that we've been working on for quite some time. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just start by giving a little bit of background in terms of who we are, just to help folks sort of understand and orient our interest in this project. So the Trustees, we're America's oldest and Massachusetts' largest land conservation organization. We're a nonprofit that operates here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We own, operate, or protect through conservation restriction over 120 different properties across Massachusetts, totaling over 27,000 acres worth. As you can see on the slide there, also, we tend to have around 2 million annual visitors and put on 5,000 programs in a normal year. This unfortunately hasn't been quite as normal as you might imagine, but a very active organization that has all sorts of activities in different types of places for people from everywhere. If you go to the next slide, this is just a quick overview of where we are in the Commonwealth, everywhere from Pittsfield to Provincetown, north and south. We have properties of a wide variety of types, everything from beaches to working farms to hiking trails, all protected and preserved for public access. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk briefly about our presence here in the city of Boston. We have 56 community gardens that are part of our network. 2 of them are in East Boston. We have the Joe Ciampa Garden, which of course is right across the street from Piers Park, then the Eagle Hill Community Garden. These are much more smaller plots of land that give access to local volunteers to grow food and are great gathering spots within the neighborhood itself. But if you do go to the next slide, one of the things that we do like to highlight is our activity on the coast. We have over 125 miles of protected coastline. We're the largest private landowner of coastline, just behind the state and just ahead of the federal government here in Massachusetts. So it's near and dear to our heart. And we do have a separate coastal initiative that we're running right now that seeks to understand what threats are posed by climate change and sea level rise to those properties and what we might be able to do to address them. And through that work, have become very interested about the city of Boston and the state of play here, and what we can do to help affect real change. So if you go to the next slide, that brings me to the Boston Waterfront Initiative and what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so about 5 years or so ago now, in 2016, the trustees launched this initiative, which broadly speaking is seeking to bring about public accessible green open space around Boston's harbor. And to do that, we set out these 4 pillars or tenets, however you want to refer to them, where we're really seeking to create world-class destinations, places with high iconic design that are really attractive to people both who live and work and play within these neighborhoods, but also come to visit from other parts of the city and really other parts of the world. But we're really trying to support a community need and access. I think one of the things we've seen most throughout this pandemic is a real desire to be outside and to have places to gather outside, and to have publicly available spaces for people to do so is a real important piece of that. We're also really concerned about the state of Boston's climate resiliency or lack thereof, and what are we doing to work together to address those needs. East Boston is, of course, one of the places that we saw very early on can be impacted quite directly when we see storm surges and even just regular monthly tidal flooding. And so that's what we're working to address there. And then finally, just how we do this all in a financially feasible manner. I mean, we are a nonprofit organization. A lot of these projects that I'll be talking about, specifically Piers Park Phase 3, we're just going to be raising money to build these and to operate these. And so that's one of the big pieces here is where do we think we can get the investment from foundations, individuals, corporations that really want to see this place built in a public manner. So throughout the process, we went looked all around the harbor, trying to identify different places that we thought would be good to try and create these types of places. And we spent a lot of time in the seaport, looked at a lot of things that are happening along 4 Point Channel, even in the North End. But we're quickly drawn to East Boston for its ability to really meet all of those needs and expectations that we had set out for ourselves at the beginning. And so I don't have to tell any of you, but there is already a pretty great park in East Boston along the waterfront. Piers Park, Phase 1, as it's become known, it was built by Massport back in the 90s. And Massport, through a recent public process, has been working to design and develop what they call Piers Park Phase 2, which is an upland piece, the empty lot between the current existing park and then the new condo buildings on the other side. And 2 to 3 years ago, in conversations with Massport, it became apparent that there wasn't any sort of strategy for what to do with that burnt out pile field of a pier that stuck off of the edge of Piers Park. And that's where we started to have conversations with them about what might be possible. We responded to a request for proposal for a nonprofit partner to design, develop, construct, and maintain that parcel, which is known as Piers Park Phase 3. Now, if you go to the next slide, you can see, why this is one that is really appealing to us. It's a fantastically central location. Obviously, has a very gorgeous view of downtown, which you are all very familiar with, and we thought would really be a great connection point between East Boston and the city of Boston as a whole, in terms of both a gathering place, but also as a place where people can spend time together and really connect. And so. That, coupled with the threats that are posed from sea level rise at that particular location, as we learned in the Climate Ready East Boston report, it quickly became a priority of ours to figure out how do we do this together. And so it took a while in some conversations with Massport to figure out if it was even feasible or possible to do that. But I am pretty excited to say that we've reached an agreement that we believe it is. And so that's where we're moving forward with tonight. If you go to the next slide, this is a interesting view of old East Boston. This is about 100 years old, this photo. And if you look, that light colored building on the right, that is what we're talking about. That is the pier in question that we now are calling Piers Park Phase 3. It used to be a place that trains would come down carrying grain from all across the Midwest to load onto barges and ships to send across the Atlantic Ocean. And so there's a fantastic maritime history to this location, and one that we really want to honor and incorporate and understand when we are working to build this park moving forward. And so that'll be a big piece of it. But if you go to the next slide, the issue is that it's in really bad shape right now. This is a view that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This was just taken standing right behind the sailing center, looking out across this pier. It's in complete disrepair. You can see some of the elements that are still there, some of the cement piling caps. There's a bit of land that does extend out into the harbor where those train tracks that would go all the way the length of that pier were supported and extended out. And so the question for us, if you go to the next slide, is what do we do with this place, and what is possible here, and how can we turn what is, you know, currently a fairly decent sized navigable hazard that's falling into the harbor at a regular clip? How do we turn that into public open space? And so one of the things that we have learned from and looked at through this process is the idea of infrastructure reuse. And if you'll go to the next slide, this is a pretty, sorry, I might have missed a slide there, but one of the places that we, oh, that's okay. I'll just keep going. So one of the places that we look to for inspiration is Brooklyn Bridge Park in Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn Bridge is actually made up of a series of 5 or 6 different piers, very similarly to the ones that were or are in East Boston, that were abandoned, in disrepair and disuse. And so we kind of looked at those, what they did there as inspirations for what we could do here. And so the image that you see here, that is of Brooklyn Bridge Park, really looking to create a robust and resilient landscape, one that we understand will have to interact with that water on an increasingly higher level as the years go on, but is both designed and built and planted and programmed in a way that works with the circumstances that we find there, and in terms of being able to stand up to those elements. If you go to the next slide, let's see what we have here. Oh, good, that was what I was expecting. The other opportunity we see here is for an increase in the native ecologies and really bringing back some of those things, those coastal experiences and landscape that you might see up in Belle Isle Marsh or other places, and really bringing them back down here to the heart of East Boston and the waterfront, and doing that in a way that not only attracts wildlife and creates resilient elements that can stand up and actually help protect our city, but do it in a way that we can educate kids and get folks down into the water and seeing what the opportunity there is to really engage with the water in a way that you can only do in a very limited fashion in a few different places around East Boston and even the city. It's a really hard thing to find how to do. If you go to the next slide here, the other big piece of this is a question of how all of these parks work together. You know, Piers Park, is, I'm sure you're probably aware, is considered a passive park that has a number of rules and restrictions around its use and what you can do there. Piers Park Phase 2 has been designed and programmed as a active park, one that has, you know, basketball courts and exercise equipment and things like that. And so our question, and what we're really trying to do when we're talking to these communities and neighborhood groups, is to understand, how do we build a place that's complementary to both Phase 1 and Phase 2, that is itself feels integrated and a part of it, but also wholly unique and a unique experience that you wouldn't be able to have anywhere else. If you go to the next slide. And again, one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we engage with the waterfront, and what are the types of activities that people would want to have available to them, whether it is, you know, having a kayak boat launch, although there are a few of those in East Boston already. You know, is this a good place to have something like that? Or even just the ability to get down to the water in a safe, accessible manner, to where you can experience that, and it's not a situation where you're necessarily putting people at risk or causing any problems in that way. And so that's really one of our key focuses, is, you know, finding out what people want to do to engage with the harbor, and then going through the process of figuring out how to do that. If we go to the next slide. And then the final piece really for us is the diverse community that is East Boston, that is the city of Boston, and finding ways to engage with everyone. And I think that starts early in this design process that we really are just at the beginning of, and that Amy will talk a little bit more about here in just a minute. But how do we reach people who we don't normally reach, and engage people that wouldn't necessarily come to a Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association meeting, but you know, if there was something that was on their time and their schedule, to really find out what would bring people here, because we feel it's important to engage and listen to a whole assortment of communities, not just the community, because I think we're quick to realize that there isn't just one community, but there's a lot of different communities and they all interact and engage with each other in different ways. How do we create an environment that feels welcoming and inclusive and you know, gives a sense of belonging to everyone here in East Boston. If you go to the next slide. Oh, there's my Brooklyn Bridge Park slide. Not sure what happened here, but yeah, so this is just a quick aerial view of Brooklyn Bridge Park. You can see there's a series of piers in place. Go to the next one. We'll see if the one I'm expecting is there. Yeah, so this is Pier 1 in Brooklyn, which is, I think, probably the closest to what we're looking at in terms of both the acreage and the size and then the landscape itself. You know, we zoomed in on some of those rocks and those sorry, the eelgrass beds there at the bottom. And that kind of gives you a sense of both the scope and the scale of what we're able to do, both creating intimate sort of forest settings, almost feeling like the coastline, but then also at the same time some active open spaces where you can imagine all sorts of various activities, large and small, happening on lawns of variety of sizes. Go to the next slide. Perfect. And so this is kind of what we think that might look like. This is just a small slice of that. It's just to start to put some ideas and thoughts into people's head about what does it mean to have access to the harbor at this location? What does it mean to have a resilient coastal edge at this location? How do you program and get and find activities that makes use of the space and the land that doesn't currently exist, and really captures not only the views of the city, but you know, we realize looking at aerial images, when you're out on the end of this thing looking out to your left, you'll be able to see all the way to Spectacle Island very easily, and it'll be just a fantastic view of the harbor. And so how do we maximize all of those pieces and put them together and ultimately build something that people in the neighborhood really want to see, and finding ways and programs and activities and things to do to really fulfill some of those needs. If you go to the next slide, this is kind of where we are in this project. I talked quite a bit about the research that went into determining whether or not this was feasible or not. We did a whole bunch of work throughout 2019 to understand the current conditions of the pier. And so now that we've finished that research phase, we're really at the beginning of this design and permitting phase. And a big piece of that for us is really rolling out this concept to the communities in the neighborhoods and starting to engage and solicit feedback. And if you go to the next slide, perfect, that's my cue. So to talk through what our next steps are going to be on this community outreach piece, I'm going to ask Amy to briefly go over where we're at, what our plan is for the next coming weeks and probably months or so, and then how we can get you guys' engagement and feedback. Amy?
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy iNation. And as Nick mentioned, I'm the project manager working on the waterfront initiative at the Trustees. I'm also an Eagle Hill resident, and happy to be here tonight. So as Nick mentioned, we've finished up the research phase and we're really kicking off design at this point. So that means that we're coming to the community. We want to hear what you'd like to see in a new public park at Piers Park 3, so that the park design and the program design can really reflect what we hear from you. So we're right now going to all the neighborhood associations and other groups to introduce ourselves, make sure you know who we are and what the project is, and how to reach us and how to stay tuned for next steps also, so that as we kind of launch this process, we can gather feedback from as many neighbors as possible. So we're hoping to hear about what types of programming you're interested in, what concerns you might have. And Nick talked about some of the goals that we have for the project, things like increasing access to the water, addressing resiliency, and within those kind of goals where that we have in mind, there's a lot of flexibility for what we can do with the park itself to make sure we also are incorporating the feedback that we hear from folks who live in the neighborhood. So we can go to the next slide, please. So we'll be doing outreach. Sorry, I meant to say this actually previously. We're doing outreach all throughout the project timeline, really with an emphasis on the design phase. Thanks. And so we can make sure that we hear those things from you right up front. And so the design, as we work on the design throughout the next year or so, we'll be able to incorporate that feedback as we go along. So you can go ahead. Yeah, thanks. So we'll be hosting a series of larger community meetings starting in early January. We've set the date for the first two. So there'll be one on January 12th, which will be in English, and then one on January 13th, which will be in Spanish. And those meetings will allow us to really go into greater detail about the project itself, things, so a little bit more about what we learned when we did those studies that Nick was talking about, structure of the pier, the soil structure underneath the pier, what's living there now, things like that. And talk about what's possible, and then really give folks more of a chance to engage in the conversation about what you'd like to see in a new public park here at Piers Park 3. So we'll start that that kind of more formal process, I guess, in January, but really opening it up now to start hearing feedback. And again, we're hoping to hear from you all throughout this process. We'll be posting more meetings and information as we go. But if something comes up and you want to send us a note, in between meetings, we're totally open to that also. I'm hoping to hear from you. So I'm going to put our contact information in the chat at the end of our slides here. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So we're hopeful that in addition to virtual meetings, which are planned now, that in the summertime we might be able to do some more creative in-person events and programs to continue to meet folks, maybe off screen, and gather feedback in person too, incorporating all the safety measures that are necessary. So that's our hopeful plan, but regardless, we're going to have a lot of different opportunities for folks to engage in the process virtually. And like I mentioned, there will be plenty of meetings, but also other ways to send in your feedback, hopefully some ways that are creative and interesting through our website, which we're working on incorporating now. And I'll also drop that link in the chat in a little bit here. And you can go to the next slide, actually. Thanks. And I just wanted to mention also that we're planning to engage our waterfront ambassadors in the outreach work as we go along through this process. So the Waterfront Ambassadors is a youth employment program that the Trustees has been running for the past few summers, based in East Boston. And they've been working on issues related to our waterfront initiative. This past year, they did a lot of outreach work around different open space projects that are happening in the neighborhood. So they did some work with Magdalena Ayed at Harbor Keepers. They did some work with the Friends of the Greenway, and they're basically just a great group of kids who are some mostly from East Boston, some from Chelsea and other neighborhoods. So we're excited about having them engaged in this process going forward because they have a lot of good stuff to say, and they're local. So there's a good link to the neighborhood who also knows the project. So we're excited about that piece too. And I think you can go to the next slide, and hopefully we've saved some time for questions that you might have. I know we just gave you a lot of information. And I just want to lead off with the note that if you want to hear more from us, or if you have another group that you belong to or an organization that you think should hear from Nick and I, or have a presentation from us, we're happy to come to you. And like I said, I'll drop our information in the chat. And I'll also put a link in the website there, a link to the website where you can sign up for blog updates if you want to stay informed. But we'll also be sharing out, different channels as meetings come up and things like that, so that folks know, what's going on with us. So yeah, hopefully, maybe we have a minute.
Yeah, that's our spiel. Are there questions or anything anyone wants to ask or raise?
Yes, so I have some questions that are coming through the chat, so I will read them off to you.
Wonderful, thank you.
So one resident said that they visited the Brooklyn Park that you mentioned and that it was wonderful. They want to know if the Trustees sponsor special events in the park, will there be a charge to attend the event, or would these be free community events?
By and large, most everything we do is free. I mean, there are sometimes special events that we'll put on that there may be some small admission fee to offset costs. I mean, again, we're a nonprofit that has to operate in that sort of way. A lot of the use of the park, I think, is an open question at this point. That's all, I'm sure, as you guys know, governed through the Piers PAC and the meetings that they have. Of course, they're having one tomorrow night. And so the usage of the park is really kind of up to them. And so we'll be working all of that out with the PAC. And I think if that's a piece that people are interested in and engaging on, of course, we'd love to hear ideas. Yeah, I would just say participating in the PAC process there is probably the best way to stay on top of it.
Okay, great. Are you working with non-English speaking organizations to encourage minority communities to feel welcome part of the planning process?
Yeah, so as Amy pointed out, we did intentionally, based upon some best practices feedback that we've heard from other groups who are doing projects in the neighborhood. Really, I think the Friends of the East Boston Greenways expansion of the Greenway up through Winthrop is a good example, and they're doing the Vision Chelsea Creek project that Magdalena is working on. That it really is more effective to, instead of trying to provide a Spanish translation of an English event, promote and put on a separate Spanish language event with the entire presentation given in Spanish with questions answered in Spanish. And so that's what we're aiming for and what we're striving for. We'll, of course, try and connect with as many folks as we can in the neighborhood. And we do have a number of nonprofit partners that do that type of work. But if there are organizations that people would recommend that we reach out to make sure that we make those connections, we're all ears. We'd love that information and make sure that we make those connections. So as Amy said, we'll put our email addresses in here, and we have a great website and a blog that kind of gives updates about that. So feel free to reach out at any point. We'd love to hear from folks.
Has a landscape architect for phase 3 been selected yet?
There has, and in fact, we're quite fortunate to be working with Michael Van Valkenburg and Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates, most notably known for their work on Brooklyn Bridge Park. And so a lot of the practices that they put in place there that they've really learned from, I think they're really looking to do something innovative and exciting here as well. And for those of you who may not have been to Brooklyn, but may have been across the way to Fort Point Channel, they were the ones who just finished Martin's Park that was built for in memory of Martin Richard. Just this past summer, I want to say it opened up. So it's a fantastic little park. In only an acre, they did some pretty amazing things. This is almost 4 times as large. And so we think it'll be a great opportunity. But yeah, we're excited to work with them.
Will you be hiring more young people as ambassadors this coming year?
Absolutely. Amy's been heading up our ambassadors program. We had to pivot pretty hard earlier this spring when it went from in-person on the ground operation to a virtual one, but we still had a really great, fantastic summer. I think we're looking to scale that up a little bit. That's, dependent upon sort of budgets and sponsorships, and we've had a lot of interest in the program. So I think we're going to be able to do more this year, even though we did last year. So I would say definitely keep an eye out for that information online. If you have teens that you want to get involved with us, we'd love to have them. So yeah, please give us some recommendations.
Sorry, a bunch more questions here. So
I got all night just until Margaret tells me to shut up.
You got a few more minutes.
Okay.
Is the start of this project tied to Piers Park phase 2 in any way? Last I heard, phase 2 was delayed until 2023.
That's a good question. I had not heard that date. I know that they're still trying to figure out exactly what their path forward is. Because we fortunately don't have the same sort of budgetary situation that Massport does, are really looking to push this project forward. And in fact, we'll need to build it somehow, and having access either through or around Piers Park phase 2 is probably how that's going to happen. And so that's part of the conversations that we're having with Massport now in terms of how we sequence construction, which is kind of a boring topic, but very important because it impacts the neighborhood in terms of vehicles and things coming through. And so we'll certainly, as that becomes more clear, be coming back to folks just to make sure everyone's aware of what's going on. No, I don't think we would be delayed by a delay of phase 2, if that makes sense, if that answers the question.
Are you looking for funds for this project, or are the funds going to the trustees for general use as you need?
Yes, without getting into too many boring details about donor restricted contributions, we are raising money directly for this project. To date, we've secured about a little over $20 million in commitments to the project. Having the official designation from Massport really helps us to ramp up those efforts to raise that money further. We don't know exactly how much we need to raise because we haven't designed the park yet, so we don't know how much it's going to cost. I would guess anywhere between $30 and $35 million. So we're already halfway to where we need to be, which is a great start, and due in no small part to some real leadership from some of our partners and foundations here in the city of Boston. Yeah, no, we're gonna have a pretty active and engaging fundraising effort. Both the big dollars that you see people throw around that are eye-popping even to me, but my goal and intention is really to have a small dollar donation effort as well, because I think people really feel ownership over the project if they can contribute their $5, $10, $20 as well to see it come to fruition, which of course we would love to have as part of that.
Upon completion, would the new park be managed and patrolled like Piers Park 1 is?
So that's a big piece of sort of negotiating work that we have to do with Massport. They of course have police. We don't have police. We have horticulture experts. They have some really great parks and open space people. And so it's one of the pieces that we'll be working out with them and with the PAC to determine exactly what all of that looks like. I would expect there would be some similarities to other Massport properties in terms of their security presence, but hours and all of that other stuff we still have to figure out with them. So definitely on the long list of things to do.
How long is the planning phase planned to last?
So that's a good question. We're because phase 2 has an initial design in place, we're really trying to work very hard on getting the design phase more caught up to where they are. As it is, though, I still think it's probably going to take a solid year or so to get to an actual developed design that we've had the opportunity to iteratively discuss with the community and get feedback and make changes, and then talk to permitting folks who then don't like things, and then we have to make other changes. How those things go. But yeah, so I think the short answer is probably at least a year's worth of design, and then we'll hopefully get the construction underway shortly thereafter.
And are there any plans for parking for the facility? Do you know what's that's gonna
Certainly not in phase 3, no. I don't think we would bring cars through the park. I believe and if any of the PAC folks are here, I believe the phase 2 section does have an allotment of parking. I don't have any details in terms of numbers of spaces or anything like that.
Speaking of Piers PAC, I had a message come through that they have an important meeting tomorrow where they will be discussing the makeup of the voting members of the PAC and the potential for term limits. It's Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. will be its monthly meeting. Going to be talking about potentially changing bylaws. So that's an important meeting to attend tomorrow if you're interested in that. And then another resident just said that traffic and trucks coming through the neighborhood, is an important information for them to know.
Of course. Yeah. And that's something I think we're very aware of, and why I think there really needs to be a well thought out plan, both between what's happening with phase 2 and phase 3, that is not only communicated, but gives the opportunity for feedback from those who will be directly impacted, because we know it's not easy to do work like this, but we feel like the benefit's going to be there. We want to be good partners and good neighbors and good stewards. And so we'll certainly be looking to communicate as much of that as we go.
Great. I think that is all I have.
Okay, thank you very much to Nick and Amy. And I do see that we did place in the chat Amy's contact information and the website for the project. So if you have additional questions or if you would like to review the plans that they have so far. Also, I can assure everyone that we will post on our Facebook page when the public meetings are for community engagement, and we encourage everyone to participate early and often.
For sure.
Excellent. And so we are going to go back on our agenda for just a quick minute. We are joined this evening by Karen Madalena, our community leader. And we have asked her to administer the oath to Judy Restrepo to have her join our board. The board of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association answers to the community. And I think that, and we believe that having a member of the community administer the oath is one of the best ways to reinforce that. So Karen, if I could ask you to unmute yourself and take it away.
Good evening, everyone. It's very exciting to have this opportunity to swear in on the new member of the board. So are you ready, Judy?
I'm ready.
And congratulations for being elected.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Okay, so it's I, and would you please say your name?
I, Judy Restrepo,
Do solemnly swear to support the residents of the Jeffreys Point neighborhood, to strive to the utmost to carry out the wishes of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association, to carry out the duties of my office to the best of my ability, to obey the bylaws, policies, and guiding principles of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association, and to work towards making Jeffreys Point the best neighborhood in Boston.
I'm sorry, I might have to break that up a little bit because I don't have it in front of me. But I do solemnly swear, and we might have to go back a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So repeat, go ahead, repeat.
I, Judy Restrepo, do solemnly swear. And then what was after that?
To support the residents of Jeffreys Point neighborhood,
To support the residents of Jeffreys Point neighborhood,
to strive to the utmost to carry out the wishes
to strive to the utmost to carry out the wishes
of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association,
of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association,
to carry out the duties of my office
to carry out the duties of my office
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
to obey the bylaws, policies,
to obey the bylaws and policies
and guiding principles
and guiding principles
of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association,
of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association,
and to work towards making
and to work towards making
Jeffreys Point
Jeffreys Point
the best neighborhood in Boston.
the best neighborhood in Boston.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We greatly appreciate that. So congratulations, Judy. And just to bring to everyone's attention.
Excuse me, Margaret, what office will be Judy be serving under the board? With the board?
I'm the co-vice chair.
Okay, great. Congratulations.
Thank you. And just to let everyone know, we did play, Rachel very nicely placed into the chat information for the link for tomorrow's Piers PAC meeting for anyone who's interested. Moving forward on the agenda, we have Tailwind Air. They are presenting to us to discuss seaplanes on Boston Harbor. We are joined this evening by Joel Rull, who is the Tailwind Assistant Chief Pilot, and Alan Rand, who is joining by phone. Take it away, gentlemen.
Hi, thank you, Margaret. This is Joe Rull from Benchmark Strategies in Boston. Trust me, you do not want me as a pilot, but we are joined today by Alan Ram, who is the CEO of Tailwind Air, Peter Manis, and Eric Christensen, who is our chief pilot. Alan Ram will be doing the presentation today, and I'm going to turn it to Alan, and we'll open up for questions after.
All right, thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody. for inviting us to come speak to you about our initiative for next year. If you can move on to the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about who we are, the people and the company itself and what we do. I'm going to describe the service that we're looking to provide to Boston, advantages for the community, some detail on harbor operations and how we integrate into the existing harbor community. We'll talk a little bit about noise and environmental impact, and then do some questions and answer. So if you can move on to the next slide. All right, so yes, Tailwind is a veteran-owned small business. And we're an experienced company. We've been in business for 6-7 years, excuse me, as an FAA authorized air carrier. We have 2 bases in Westchester, New York, and Bridgeport, Connecticut today. We have been operating seaplanes in and out of New York City for about 7 years. Very stable and experienced management team. The core management team has been together nearly that entire time. Great team of pilots, dispatchers, maintainers. We're actually up to nearly 30 employees these days. We do 2 things. In addition to operating seaplanes as sort of urban shuttles in and out of urban areas, we also manage and charter other aircraft, land aircraft as well. There's about 15, 16 of those. This is part of a wider process where we apply through the FAA for use of the harbor. It's called a seaplane base. That's the authorization that's going through. And as part of that, we're reviewed by obviously multiple different parts of the FAA, but by the Coast Guard, the police, Boston Police, and Harbor Master, and we engage with a whole series of stakeholders, ferry operators, neighborhood associations, essentially all the key stakeholders in the area, safety committee, port operator group, et cetera, et cetera. And so we wanted to make sure that we reach out to as many people as we can. This is something that we want to be a useful, interesting part of the city landscape, as it is in a lot of other cities, as you'll hear later. And so we're looking forward to engaging with everyone. Next chart, please. So this is this is essentially the core why. This is why we would be interested in doing something like this. Even though the seaplane as an aircraft is a little bit slower than the various jet aircraft that go in and out of Logan, because it can directly access the urban core, the travel time is nearly half that of the various shuttles or the Acela train. And obviously even less than that in terms of the Northeast Regional or driving. As you can see in the chart here, it can be as little as 2 hours door to door, depending on your location to the dock, the dock location in your, where you are, in reference to that. Not nearly so much travel time as the train, and not nearly so much time waiting in the airport as the shuttle. Also, as a side note, we think this is even more COVID friendly or post-COVID friendly than some of these other modes. The airplanes are there's a fairly small number of passengers in the airplanes, only about 8 usually. And people will generally be able to avoid the airports, train station, the large areas of congregation. So that's an advantage as well. If you go to the next chart, please. The aircraft that we use is something called a Cessna Grand Caravan amphibian. So that means as an amphibian, it does have landing gear as well as floats. It's an airplane that's been in production for over 30 years, with over 2,500 of them built by Cessna. We use 2 pilot crews in our aircraft always. It's powered currently by a turboprop engine, although this is one of the earliest aircraft types in development for electric propulsion because of the size and the range that it operates. Which is about roughly 300 miles or so is how far it goes. The amphibious capability means that the airplane in the case of inclement weather, or depending on, alternate destinations, can go to land. If the airplane is coming into the harbor and has to divert to the airport, it can. But by the same token, if, there's a route of interest, let's say to Hartford or a land destination, the airplane can do that as well. The airplane is equipped with 8 seats, as I mentioned. You can see in the bottommost picture, while it's a small airplane, it's not, it is a commuter aircraft. It's not a super luxurious, a standard, standard seat. Nice thing is everybody has a window and an aisle, so that's always fun. And there is a nice big picture windows in the airplane, charging, air, lights, overhead lights, the usual sort of amenities. The service that we're going to provide will have light snacks and things of that nature, but really the main point is to get people, from from Boston to New York as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So here's some important points about, why this is a useful thing. Again, this is connecting Boston with its largest travel partner. Essentially, the most number of trips between Boston and anywhere else is New York City, at as little as 2 hours door to door. We think that's a differentiator in attracting businesses and residents. Again, it's another form of transportation. It's not meant to supplant anything else, but to augment and hopefully offload traffic off of other modes, the airport in particular. These are not, they're certainly not cheap. It's not the Chinatown bus, but it is designed to compete with the shuttle, last minute shuttle tickets and last minute Acela tickets, ranging at about, $295 to $495 for a one-way trip between the two cities, with discounted commuter books available for, people who commute often, or, corporate plans or large group purchases. On top of that, this certainly would be a job creation tool. The airplanes will certainly some part of the airplanes will be based in the area with the attendant pilots and mechanics. Certainly we have been, 6 or 9 months ago, we were, it was very challenging to hire air crew. And now, of course, in the post-COVID world, we're a place that people are actually coming to who've lost their jobs at air carriers. And then, of course, there'll also be local customer service and, dockside staff as well. And all of these things, the business connection, the fast speed, the local jobs created, they should all have a positive financial impact. Next chart, please. Just again, some 101s on seaplanes, a lot of common questions that we get. So again, first and foremost, these are amphibious, so they can go on land or sea. The landing gear is actually in the floats of the airplane, so they extend when they need to. When the aircraft are in the air, they follow the rules of the air, as all the other air traffic does. But in the water, the aircraft follow the rules of the water, according to the Coast Guard. So we give way to, less maneuverable craft like sailboats or large cargo ships, things of that nature. The seaplanes are essentially powerboats from that perspective. Also, when you see, as you will on a future chart, kind of a takeoff and landing area, that is not some sort of, carved out piece of water that has buoys around it that no one enters or leaves. The seaplanes completely integrate with all the other maritime traffic. The pilots are very used to doing this. They'll go a little further or a little shorter as they need to land in and around boats. We'll talk about this a little later, but seaplanes operate in very densely trafficked waterways all over the U.S., all over the world. It's very common. The airplanes obviously can come to a stop pretty quickly. So once they hit the water, if the power comes off, the airplanes will stop, pretty darn fast. They're treated again like a boat, also, from a safety perspective, life-preserving equipment, marine radio. Things of that nature. So we certainly operate as a member of the maritime community. We're not some sort of separate element Yeah, next chart, please. So the operation itself, what we're proposing is roughly a 4-time daily weekday departure and arrival from Boston Harbor to the Manhattan Seaplane base. This is an existing facility that's been in use for a long time, the Manhattan one, on East 23rd Street in the East River. We would probably operate mostly in alignment with daylight savings for the most part, from early March to, from mid-March to early December. To note, the airplanes have to be able to visually clear the water of obstacles and traffic. So in low visibility conditions, the airplanes will not operate, which means not only bad weather, but we do not operate before dawn. We do not operate after dusk. So from that perspective, the airplanes are not going to be around, in the night or anything like that. We also, in working with the FAA and the Coast Guard and the Harbor Master, we made a commitment not to operate generally on the weekends when boat traffic is at its peak, or peak holidays. So the aircraft generally intended as a business or sort of bookending the weekend commuter shuttle type operation, and so we're not generally going to operate during we're not going to operate on the weekend. Again, we mentioned 8-passenger Cessna Caravan, and as you can see in the graphic below, we will be parallel to Logan's runway 32. Different from New York, this is actually fully integrated with Boston Logan Tower, meaning that the airplanes are slotted into approach paths for the airport, kind of standardized approach paths. We also, we're integrated with the rest of the traffic. We are under control of the tower. And the same thing goes on the takeoff side as well. So when the airplanes pull out from the dock and they're headed to go to take off, they'll be in touch with Logan Tower, who will, clear them to go. As you can also see, we'll talk a little bit about this more. The takeoff and landing area is meant to be, fairly close to the middle of the channel, but more closer to the airport side. So we are no less than 1,000 feet from any, non-airport area. And in some cases, nearly a mile from a lot of neighborhoods. And the airplanes, again, we'll talk a little bit about this on the noise side, but the only time the airplane is operating at full power is in the middle of the channel. So the approach to and from the dock is done at idle power. The airplanes follow wake rules like boats do. So they actually tend to be generally pretty quiet on the whole. Next chart, please. To note, the seaplanes don't really have a big impact on marine operations. It is not some extra, noise, new neighbor, elbowing their way in. As I mentioned before, the seaplanes easily integrate among other watercraft with no special accommodations required. In Seattle, Vancouver, New York, Miami, all sorts of places, which we'll talk about later, that there are thousands and tens and thousands of seaplane flights integrated into very busy waterways, such that, the seaplanes are really part of the fabric of life in a lot of these communities. Again, as part of this process, we work with the Coast Guard, the Harbor Master, the FAA, local and state the governing bodies, as well as the state, local stakeholders. Again, highlighting the aircraft are responsible for avoiding, lower maneuverability watercraft in the area, and generally all watercraft, frankly, because they, a lot of people don't know how to handle the seaplanes. So the seaplanes generally know to avoid everyone. And the airplanes are very maneuverable. I mentioned again that it's a visual operation, so we don't operate in severely bad weather or in the dark. And again, we obey watercraft rules. Next chart, please. We often get asked about how we come in, how we come into the waterway. Again, that we mostly follow the existing approach paths to the airport. You can see two of the most common ones on the chart above. You know, with the wind generally being out of the sort of northwest, we'll come in towards the either the east to west Logan runways or the sort of northwest facing Logan runways, and then at the very end we move into the head towards the channel. We will follow whatever the active patterns are. So, if the patterns do shift so that we're approaching from the north or from the west, the current pathways are to follow the local waterways, the rivers and the channels. And as we'll talk about on another chart, the airplanes, not only will we be avoiding the housing areas, the airplanes are significantly quieter than any jet aircraft. Also to note, we're talking about 4 flights a day versus say the 1,200 that come in and out of Logan. So, generally speaking, this will be, in the ambient noise that's already out there. And as I mentioned on a previous chart, the whole operation is intended to really respect distances from the populated shore communities. Next chart, please. So to the point of noise, on the very high end of the spectrum here, a helicopter or a jet-powered aircraft at a fairly close range, coming into land on a building or a dock or something of that nature, as you can see, is in sort of the 90s of decibels. A jet engine at power, 300 feet away is well over 100. The seaplanes at takeoff power, so that is their maximum noise level at the 1,000-foot distance, which is the closest that they will be from anything when that happens, is around the noise level of a car going by. We have videos of this that folks are welcome to see, but the airplanes maneuver all the way from the dock, again at a fairly low power setting, and then they get to the middle of the channel, they'll take off at full power, and they'll get into the air, and then once they're in the air, again, they blend into the existing noise profile. They're even quieter than obviously some, loud ferries and powerboats. Next chart, please. So just a quick example, I mentioned about some of these other cities. In New York, where we've been operating for 6-7 years, New York sees about 2,500 flights a year in and out of the New York Seaplane base. Miami is about, over 4,000 flights a year. And to note that the Miami Seaplane base is in the channel between downtown Miami and South Beach. So again, very busy waterway. In New York, we operate in the East River, which is an order of magnitude tighter space than the harbor channel that we're talking about here. And then last but most is Seattle. So in Seattle, there are usually about 50,000 seaplane flights a year. Vancouver is even more. Effectively, the seaplanes are so common they become a fast ferry in the area. They connect a lot of the lakes and islands, small communities with the downtown. And once you get at that scale, the service is very affordable. The seaplane tickets in those communities are $100 or less in many cases. And for perspective, this operation, if you do the math on what we're talking about 800 flights a year. So that's, significantly lower than any of these other communities.
Thank you, Alan. It's 8:07 and we are running a little bit over time, so we're going to move into the chat, please.
Yeah, I think that's the last chart if you go.
It is.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I checked.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions. First we have, so John Lynds from the East Boston Times is here. Cape Air CEO Dan Wolf and Senior Vice President Andrew Bonney repeatedly told the community at numerous meetings that takeoff and landing area in the water off EC will be restricted by the FAA to only Cape Air operations. When did this change?
So I can't speak to what Dan said or why he said it. What I can say is that each what he might have meant is that each seaplane operator has to individually apply to the FAA for permission to use the waterway. So Cape's application, it was specific to Cape. Maybe that's what he intended, but it obviously would be anti-competitive for the FAA to award a monopoly to the first company that comes through the door. So, each application is looked at individually, and I think that's what they meant, is that their application was exclusive to them as ours is for us. So just because we're approved doesn't mean anyone else is automatically approved, and the same thing went for Cape.
Have your seaplanes been approved? And if they are approved, will the planes be flying over Jeffreys Point?
Approved for what? I'm sorry.
I think
for use in Boston?
Yeah.
No, we're still in the process. That's still an ongoing process. We're hoping to begin operations by, say, April or May of 2021. And at the moment, I don't believe any of the routings are over Jeffreys Point. I'll have to defer. Eric, are you able to comment on that?
None of them are. They all run south of Jeffreys Point, so there won't be any departures or arrivals over Jeffreys Point at all.
Okay.
Where would people board the planes from?
So that's one of still our outstanding questions. We are looking at dock sites in South Boston, downtown, essentially around the harbor in general. This particular process that we're going through is completely focused on the ability to land and take off and operate in the waterway. So we need to get past this stage first. We have to have approval to use the waterway in order to then, be able to then use a dock. So we're talking to a lot of different dock folks, but that's, it hasn't been finalized yet. But it's, be somewhere in the inner, again, South Boston, downtown, the perimeter of the harbor.
Will the seaplane pilots be required to have USCG captain's licenses?
No, they don't have to have Coast Guard captain's licenses. The seaplane license in and of itself, the credentialing for that, which is on the FAA side, trains them in all the same, not all the same, but all the required functions for using the seaplane on the water. So it's a separate rating that the FAA awards.
Has the shift to video from in-person business meetings impacted your plan?
Not really. We're estimating that we will be, I think 0.02% of the intercity traffic. So if we, again, you have an 8-seat airplane going 4 times a day. So we are expecting that there will still be sufficient demand at that fairly low level. But it is a new world, and we'll have to see. Certainly this next year is going to be a test to see, how much travel that there really is.
Are the planes going to circle the harbor or the city to land to give passengers a nice experience when taking off and landing?
That would, as lovely as that would be, no, the airplanes will be in the patterns for Logan Airport. So when they tell us to land, we're going to land, and when they tell us to go, we're going to go.
Okay. So one resident says they have concerns about noise level and boater safety, in particular thinking of students and users at the Piers Park Sailing Club. And they've been on 2- and 4-seater planes. Was with their brother, who was a U.S. Air Force pilot, and they are not as quiet as a car being suggested here. That's just a comment. Is TSA screening needed to board the airplanes?
So to come on the airplane, you have to be checked against the no-fly list, and there's some basic, bag check, but it is not the same as the conventional airport screening. So there's not a, the body scanner or the, full metal detector. It's kind of an abbreviated security.
I think that's it. Any other questions, put them through the chat now, but I think we covered everything that's already been put through.
All right. Well, look, we're happy to answer any further questions. Feel free to, we'll give out information. Feel free to email, or reach out in another way. And we're looking forward to becoming, part of the community.
We got one more comment just to end on from a neighbor. We are currently bearing the impact of an international airport that is polluting our neighbors. It seems that this will be adding to the burden we bear. Additionally, given the price point, it doesn't seem to serve our neighborhood. And that is it. So, Margaret, that's it.
Okay. Can we ask Alan that if people have any questions, could you share in the chat your contact information so that if people have concerns or questions, they can continue to research them?
Sure, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Next up this evening, we have 44 Cottage Street. This is a proposal to raise an existing structure and erect a 4-unit residential dwelling with a roof deck and a parking for 4 vehicles. The developer is Crespo Construction. It is represented by attorney Richard Lynds.
Good evening, Margaret, members of the board. I'm Richard Lynds. I'm here tonight on behalf of Crespo Construction. I believe Ricky Crespo is with us as well. Also Sharon Gengis with Joy Street Design, the project architect. We have, I believe, the most recent presentation that we presented at the Planning and Zoning Subcommittee at the last meeting, and I'll run through that briefly before the board goes ahead and goes forward with its voting procedure. So you can go to the next slide, please. So this proposal would actually combine 2 parcels. A new parcel would create about 2,200 square feet. We would be raising the existing structures and proposing to replace that with a 4-unit dwelling. There'll be a total of 4 parking spaces. I'll explain a little bit about the parking when we get to that slide. Actually, there's a tandem arrangement, so there'll actually be 3 spaces available for the units. All these are about 2-bedroom, 2 baths, ranging in size for anywhere from about 850 square feet up to about 1,000. And this is intended for home ownership upon completion. You can go to the next slide. We can jump through these relatively quickly and just go to the street view. All right, stop. Let's go back one more. So this is the abstract from the BPDA, again, combining 2 lots. There is a rear lot, which you can see outlined here on the screen, about 40 feet wide by about 22 feet deep. That's a landlocked parcel, so that really can't be built on for any other purposes unless it's combined with another parcel. This is located in the 3F 2000 subdistrict. That's the zoning designation. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the end of the presentation. Next slide. So what we're looking at is the 2-story building on the right side of the screen is the building that would be torn down, and our proposal would again build our building exactly by the same footprint of where this building is, maybe a little bit further to the right. We would be on the 0 lot line with respect to the building on the left. Next slide. Just a further view down the driveway. You can see the garage in the back of the property that would also be demolished in connection with this project. Next slide. So we're looking up Cottage Street, and this is towards the waterfront, and you can see the sort of some of the architecture that's existed on this section of Cottage Street for some time. There's some newer architecture as well with the 8 units that are located directly across the street from this site. You can see on the left side of the page. Next slide. Looking down Cottage Street towards Sumner. Next slide. And this is our site plan. We can come back to this for reference. If we can go to the next slide, we have a site plan, more detail. Okay. This is the lower level. What we're showing here is the footprint of the building with the 4 parking spaces located at grade and the trash storage located at the left side of your screen. We do have the entryway and utilities located at the lower level. When I mentioned previously about the 4 parking spaces, spaces 2 and 3 would be tandem. And therefore would make the most sense if those are assigned to 1 unit, since you won't have to rely on somebody who doesn't own that space to actually move it to get out of space 3. So those would be 2 spaces, but considered a tandem arrangement. Space 1 and 4 could be independent and can be maneuvered without having any other vehicles moved. We did do an analysis of this parking layout to ensure that it does meet the maneuverability requirements. So all of these spaces would be accessible and capable of being utilize without having to move any other vehicles or have any difficulty in maneuvering into the driveway. Next slide. So we're showing our floor plans for the first 3 levels. Our first floor plan is the 855 square foot unit. You can see here that it's a 2-bedroom with a rear deck. We move up to unit 2 and 3. They're pretty identical at about 1,000 square feet. The next slide. And then we're showing unit 4, about 1,000 square feet as well. We are showing a roof deck that would be exclusive to unit 4 that would have be accessed by a hatch. We are not proposing a head house. They may be included in the renderings, but based upon comments that we've heard from the Board of Appeals recently, incorporating a head house is not something that they typically would approve in this case. So we will convert that to a skylight hatch for purposes of access to the roof deck. Next slide. And just our elevations, probably better illustrated in the renderings if we can jump to the rendering. So here's our rendering. Based upon what we see in that neighborhood, the Crespos felt very strongly about incorporating brick. This is not something you typically see in new development in the neighborhood, especially on a project of this size, but based upon the project they're proposing, they committed to doing brick for 4 units. I can let Sharon talk a little bit about the design elements and some of the features that we've included here to just go through some of the material that we're looking at.
Sure. Yeah. So as Richie mentioned, we're looking at using brick for the front and the side of the building. We're going to be doing accent bands. Those are those gray bands that you see in like a cast stone or some other sort of accent material. We're also looking to use some interesting patterns with the masonry. This is not going to be a thin brick. This will be a full depth brick wall, so we'll be able to do some nice, hoping to include some nice brickwork. On the bays, we have a metal panel, and on the top, a lighter color metal panel so that the top recedes a little bit. One thing that has changed that's not represented here is the roof deck. Right now, we're showing a metal railing. We're going to change that to a cable rail or glass railing or something else that's less highly visible.
You can go to the next slide. So through the process, we were asked to show some of the relationships of our building to the buildings further up Cottage Street, because we do have some taller buildings on this side of Cottage Street. And again, Sharon, if we could just talk a little bit about the relationship of our building to the 4+ story building further up the street.
Yeah, so what we tried to do was to make the building have a sort of 3-story massing at the street so that it ties into the building right next to it. And then the 4th story is recessed slightly. And then what you see, and I think we have an elevation that shows this as well, is that because of the way the street slopes up, and because of the other 4-story buildings on the street, it really is not that out of context for what is around it.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we were asked to incorporate this through the planning and zoning subcommittee process was to show the relationship of what exists, as well as the grade separation from where we're at to further up Cottage Street with the taller building. So next slide. Sharon, I know we have 2 slides here for the shadow, and I think that this again was part of the planning and zoning subcommittee, so I don't know which one better illustrates the conversation. We have this one, and if we could just jump to the next one as well. If you want to go through the first or the second one, just let us know.
Yeah, why don't we go through this one first, and then we can jump back to the other one. So these are the shadow studies, and looking at these, you can see with the proposed building, which is shown in orange, the ways that the shadows would be cast. In June, that's when the sun is highest in the sky, and so you have the least amount of shadows. In December, the sun is lowest in the sky, so you can see you have more shadows there. And then in March and September, at the equinoxes, you'd have sort of the middle case of the shadows. But I think what's more important than showing the shadow studies is really showing the difference between what's existing now and what's proposed. So if you want to go back to the previous slide, that's where we did a comparison showing using that middle condition, which is the March and September, the morning, afternoon, and night, And you can see on the top, those are the existing shadows that are being cast. And then on the bottom, there are the proposed shadows being cast. And so, you can see that because of the height of the other buildings and because of the slope of the street, there's already pretty significant shadows. And so this is not a huge change in the shadows that are being cast around by the proposed building.
Yeah, and I want to point out, you can see in the diagram where we sort of that orange highlight, the depth of our building is consistent with the building immediately to the left of it. So we're trying to put something, that is that meets up with what's already there to the left side of our property. The existing building is obviously a bit more shallow than our neighbor, so we're using that as sort of our finish line, so to speak, for the back of the building. Next slide, please. Here we go. So with respect to the relief, we're proposing a 4-unit that's considered a multifamily dwelling. So we would require a variance for that. We have the minimum lot size, lot width, front yard, and our side yard conditions are all compliant with Article 53. We are proposing a 10-foot driveway on the right side, so that would also be sufficient for the driveway width. Our rear yard, we're proposing at 6 feet. The required setback is only 10 feet based upon the shallow lot condition that already exists. So we are requesting a variance. Bear in mind, there is a garage structure already to the rear of the property that would be demolished. So there was already an existing condition with the building on the property. Our floor area ratio we're proposing is at a 1.68. 1.0 is the maximum, and that's the relationship of the amount of square footage we have to how much land we have. I would submit that the 1.68 is relatively consistent with what is around the immediate area, including the larger 4-story building further up the street. Our building height is at 42 feet, 1 inch, 35 feet is the maximum. So we're about 7 feet over that. So we're requesting a variance, but once again, we're not introducing a height here that has not been long existing in this particular area. I know that concern comes up a lot about height, about previous buildings that were recently permitted. This 4-story building that's on Cottage Street has probably been there, I gotta say, more than 60 years. Our open space is still being calculated and worked on, but we will look at the decks that we're proposing as well as the roof deck to coordinate that. We still require a variance for that because we aren't likely to meet the total of the 1,200 square feet that's required. And again, that is already relatively an existing condition on the property. There's little open space with the driveway that already exists. Our parking, we're proposing 4 spaces, we said, and 2 of those will be tandem. 5 spaces is the actual requirement, and therefore requesting a variance for that. I think that's one of the process over. You can jump through that quickly. Yeah, so we held a total of 3 planning and zoning subcommittee meetings. We also held an abutters meeting. The comments that we did here, and I believe there are some abutters this evening, the comments we did here is the height and the design were not of the concern. The concern was the number of units in relationship to the number of parking spaces. My client is in the process of trying to address that to see if there's an opportunity to add an additional parking space, either remotely or on the site through some different design features. And certainly we're going to try to do that and accommodate that based on the abutters reception to the height of our building as well as the design, and indicating that those were less of a concern. The parking was more of the concern for the immediate area. We do not have a zoning board of appeal date. Once we do, I'm sure that the board of the JPNA will inform its membership. But once that occurs, assuming we get our approval, we'll go through BPD design review for this building. The earliest we expect a permit to issue is more likely to be spring 2021, assuming this goes forward, and construction beginning shortly thereafter in sometime spring or summer of 2021. It takes about 10 to 12 months to complete. Next slide. That's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, it looks like we have one direct abutter on the line. So Mark, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask them verbally since you are a direct abutter. Okay, so we will move on to questions in the chat. A lot of concerns about the parking plan. Wanted to know if there was a swept path plan to see how the car actually behaves on the path it would travel to get out of these spots. Has there been one done or no?
What, I'm sorry, say that again?
Swept path plan?
So I'm not sure of the terminology, but we've had the architect look at the measurements of the distance between the two spaces. There are maneuvers. There's a 3-point turn maneuver for space 4. Space 3 also, space 1 also would have some maneuvering. But yeah, we've had the architect look at that and consider the measurements based upon what the design requirements are of the Boston zoning code.
Okay. Judy, can you put back up the parking plan just so people can look at that? There was a request for that. Give me 1 second. Another comment: upon reading the BOA refusal letter, I have concerns about the proposed garage and parking plan and the parking maneuverability. Then let's see what else we have. One person commented they were concerned about the number of units. Let's see.
Yeah, we did hear about the unit count in the abutters meeting, and the concern, just to be clear, was the relationship of the units to the parking. So we understand that concern, and we're certainly looking at ways to address that.
Okay, another person said thinks both the unit and the parking is too much. Question is, where are the columns and where are the walls in the parking area?
Yeah, I don't, we're at probably a schematic drawing right now. I don't know that we've done a structural analysis of the building, but this is essentially the layout that we're presenting to the Board of Appeal. If the concern is that we cannot build the parking the way we're proposing it, then we can't do this plan. So this is something that will obviously be thought out in much more detail by the team before there's any any progress on it. We can't just say we can't do the parking. So it'll have to work whatever the design ultimately is.
And if I can just give a little more detail on that, if you look at the plan, that dashed line is the building above, and the dark squares are the columns that'll be supporting the building above. So there'll have to be some sort of steel, probably. There you go. Yep, supporting so that the cars can go in underneath the building. So parking space 4 is completely under the building, but parking spaces 1, 2, and 3 are more open, and not covered by the building. And we did do a maneuverability study, and it's not in the slide deck anymore, but basically we looked at the turning radius for the typical cars that would be used in here based on the Boston Transportation Department's regulations, and these all do meet those regulations.
Question is, are the units condo or rental, and are there any ideas on how to care for the residents in the attached building, mitigating noise, dust, structural, or other issues?
Yeah, so these are intended for home ownership, so these will be condo. Yeah, like with any project in the city, there has to be a construction management plan. This is not the first and certainly won't be the last project that's built like this, where it's in close proximity to an adjoining neighbor. All of those issues will have to be worked through before any demolition can even begin, including surveys of the existing property to ensure that there are no structural issues when we remove our building, and certainly to ensure that if there's any damage done during construction, that's addressed and through the process.
Another resident is saying that this will directly block their view of the city. Another resident said the design is of concern and it doesn't fit with the look of the other buildings.
I'm sorry, hold on, let me just respond to that. Can you go back to the rendering? Can you go to the other one? Next one. So there are a couple of elements here, and Sharon, I'll try to play architect. So we actually looked at the neighborhood to try to come up with something that fits in with the neighborhood. Sharon, if you talk a little bit about the bulk of our building with the cornice line matching the two buildings immediately going up Cottage Street, and then sort of why we differentiate the materials on the roof.
Yeah, so you can see that the cornice lines of the other 3-story buildings are matched by the cornice of our building. And then the material above is different because of the massing of the building being different. And I think, one thing I would say is that, the architecture is not trying to replicate a historic architecture because, in my opinion, unless you're living in a historic district, that's not really an appropriate, it's not really appropriate in modern times to try to replicate historic. I think the idea is to be respectful of the historic and to try to work with some similar materials and similar massings, but to make something that is contemporary but respectful. So that was our goal in the design. And I think that incorporating some nice brickwork is exactly in line with, with that intent.
Yeah, and one resident did just say they think the design is nice, it's modern, but complements many of the historic elements.
Thank you.
And what else? Let's see. Another comment about the parking layouts, that it doesn't actually work in practical way and doesn't do service to the community for future residents.
Let me just add. So the parking layout doesn't work. And again, I don't want to be argumentative. So Sharon mentioned previously that, we brought this up at a planning and zoning subcommittee meeting, that the calculations were done based upon the BTD's guidelines, and it does work. So people are certainly entitled to their opinion, but the parking does work for the site.
Understood. That is all I have right now. Margaret?
Okay, thank you very much. We'd like to check and see, is Aaron Daigneault here? We don't see him, but we wanted to verify and give him a chance if he had signed in under another name. Aaron Daigneault, going once, going twice. Okay, I guess we're, unfortunately, we will not be hearing for the project for 156 Webster Street this evening. We will reschedule this for a future meeting. As a reminder, the 44 Cottage Street presentation you just saw is going to be up for a vote. In the next 48 hours, you will receive an email from the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association with a link to the program we are using for voting. And all votes will be due no later than 7 p.m. than 7 p.m. on Friday. If you do not receive the link, or if you think that there has been an error in your not receiving a link, please email the board at board@jeffreyspoint.org, and we will be happy to check into it for you. As a reminder, the planning and zoning meeting for this month is scheduled for Wednesday, December 16th, in case you're up for a double dose of us this week. And on that meeting will be 42 Everett Street, 377 Maverick Street, and 289 Sumner Street. All of those projects and their associating presentations are posted on our website at www.jeffreyspoint.org. Board members, have I covered everything?
No.
Oh.
Margaret?
Hi, Karen.
Hi. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Committee, but I'm asking this question. I posted something on the chat page and it wasn't read. It wasn't addressed. So I'd like that to be addressed. I put it in again. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Karen, I read it. I did read that, that there was concern. Let me just read it again.
If it was about the parking, it was addressed directly to
was.
What about was it you were referring to the Board of Appeal letter?
Yes, I did refer to that.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you.
No
Well,
problem.
and actually, can I make a slight, this is Sharon from Joy Street. I want to make a slight clarification. We had submitted a plan earlier that did not have the proper clearances, and that might be what the Board of Appeal letter is referring to. We have amended the layout, and so this layout you see is not what their letter was referring to, and so we're going to resubmit.
Yeah, I can also just add some color to that. So when we initially submit our plans, Karen, the initial set of plans is typically what the refusal letter is based on. We then update those plans as we work through the community process, just the way the city wants it done. So the ultimate set of plans that will go before the board will be the one with the updated parking layout, and that's part of the process.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Margaret, just want to clarify one more thing, that only people who are eligible to vote will receive receive ballots by email. Just wanted to say that.
That is correct. And you are eligible to vote because you are here at this particular meeting and that you have been present at one monthly meeting in the past 3 months, or you are a direct abutter. So I would like to wish everyone on behalf of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association, I'd like to wish everyone a happy holidays. We hope that you and your family and loved ones are safe and healthy. And we thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a great night.